In this tutorial, you'll see an overview of how AssetAccountant works with Sage Intacct, specifically for use in the USA and as it relates to fixed asset depreciation. We'll start by creating a new draft asset in Sage Intacct. Then we'll show you, step by step, how it is pulled into AssetAccountant, then walk through the many features available to precisely account for depreciation.
The first thing I'm going to do in this demonstration is create a new draft asset in Intacct. When you set up Sage Intacct to work with AssetAccountant, we ask you to set up a draft asset clearing account as part of your general ledger setup. AssetAccountant will pick up any new draft asset that's entered into that GL as soon as it's posted. It doesn't matter the source of that entry. It can come from accounts payable, it can come through credit card transactions, or it can come through a manual journal, which is what I will do in this case. So I'll just create a new journal, and let's say this is going to be my new laptop. I'm going to post this to the draft asset clearing account in here. So let's say that's $2,000. And then the other side will go to accounts payable. Once I submit that in Intacct, that transaction will be posted to the GL. Then I can navigate to AssetAccountant and refresh my draft asset screen here. When you do that, that will go and interrogate the clearing account in Intacct, and you can see my new laptop has appeared with the acquisition date, the cost, a reference. It will also pull through any dimensions that are set in Intacct in relation to that asset as well. Once you've got that brought through into AssetAccountant, there are three things you can do here. You can ignore it. If that's come through in error, then you can just say this is an error and you need to clean it up in Intacct. If it's an additional cost for an existing asset, then you can just add that cost to the asset. Or in most cases, it will be a new asset, so you would just choose to add that as an asset to your register. Once you select that, this screen will pop up and you can see my new laptop with the description, the asset group here, chosen as computer equipment for you to confirm. You can edit any cost or acquisition details if you require. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see the default methods for the group you've chosen. In this case here, for computer equipment, this is the method that's been chosen, so a half-year declining balance method. These are all the IRS methods that you'll recognize available as standard in the system. And you can choose if you would like to apply a bonus depreciation or Section 179 depreciation as appropriate. There's also a lookup tool that interrogates the IRS lives for various assets, and a drop-down here that gives you an option to choose from the allowable effective lives under each method that you have selected. For accounts or book purposes, you can also edit this, overriding the default depreciation method if you need to. So you can do that here, or you can just update the useful life if you'd like to do that. So once you've confirmed that's correct, then you can just save that, and you'll see that that asset has now disappeared from draft assets. I'm now going to navigate to the assets section of the system, and here you will see the screen that you will witness when you first enter this particular register, and likely where you'll do most of your work from in AssetAccountant. So the structure of the screen is down the left-hand side are the various asset groups. Across the top, you can see the movement in the book value of the period you're looking at. In this case here, November 2025. This drop-down menu allows you to navigate between periods, so you can move month to month, quarter by quarter, year to date, financial years, or so on. Or you can also choose a custom period if you need. There is also a toggle here to choose between reviewing the book data or the tax data from here, and you can just choose to navigate between both of those up there. These columns open up if you want further detail about what makes up the book values on the screen. And you can also open up the asset groups as well to see the individual assets. Just before we go into an individual asset, I'm going to go into an asset group screen and show you what's available in here. Within the asset group screen, this has got some information about the current standing of the assets in the group, so you can see the cost, accumulated depreciation, and so on. And then you've got the settings for this group. So a name, you can give it a description, and you can also create a parent group if you want a hierarchy in your asset register. This is where the default methods are set for each of those. So you'll recall the default methods for that particular asset we brought in earlier. The laptop were as shown here, and I override the straight line to 5 years. So that's 20% for that asset. And then down here, this is where the integration with Intacct is set up. So you can see this is where I've mapped the journal line entries that Asset Accountant will produce into the GL accounts in Sage Intacct from here. So that is all set up at the asset group screen. I'll just go back to the assets now. So you can see here, if I open up the computer equipment and scroll down, you'll see here I've got my new laptop that I set up there. So that's $2,000. So I can go into the screen. Every asset has a screen similar to this, so you can extract full information about any particular asset if you're concerned about managing assets one at a time. So you can see the structure of the screen has got the name and the description at the top, the reference, and then the schedules here for the accounts and the tax depreciation. So here you'll recall for book purposes, we're depreciating this asset over 5 years straight line, so that's 20% a year. And the full schedule is shown here. So as soon as the asset's in the system, it calculates the monthly depreciation for the whole life of the asset. And that means every time you create a journal, it's just going to pick up the relevant number there. We don't need to do the calculation each time. And then likewise under the tax tab, you can see the IRS method here. In this case here, I selected bonus depreciation. So that's been calculated automatically now. The details tab here gives you these three areas: classifications, custom fields, and attachments. The classifications are analogous to the dimensions in Intacct, and had I set any dimensions in Intacct would have been pulled through. From here, what you can do is you can just set a location if you need to do that. So let's just say that is in Boston. We do allow splitting of these options. So if an asset is shared 50% in Boston and 50% in New Orleans, for example, you can set those percentages there and that will split the journals up by those amounts. And then you can also add custom fields to assets as well, and you can have as many of these as you like. So if you wanted a barcode reference, then you could just put the barcode reference in. So you can store as much standing data in relation to each asset as you like. And then finally, you can add attachments either as uploads to the system or as links. If you use an online document management system, you can just put the link and the name there. And again, there's no limit to the number of those that you can have. Market value is useful for any business that needs to track the market value of its assets as well. Generally, this is used for companies that are rental companies or equipment hire companies where the market value of the assets are important to track, but you can use that for tracking market value for whatever purpose. I'll now show you what you can do to individual assets from this screen. It's worth just bearing in mind that all of these things can also be done in bulk, and I will come back and show how that takes place later on in the demonstration. So over here, bulk actions lets you manage large volumes of assets if you need to do that. So you don't need to manage assets one at a time. But I'll just run you through this one at a time now so you can see the power of the system. In this actions menu here, you can bring in an opening balance. So that's used if you're bringing in an asset partway through its life and it's partly depreciated. Rather than using our numbers, you can actually set an opening balance at the date you want AssetAccountant to start doing the depreciation from. That means that there's no need to reconcile or recreate your calculations or do any adjusting journals as a result of using AssetAccountant. Components are supported for parent-child relationships between assets. So if you need to connect assets as in a parent-child relationship, you can do that. And you can either create a new asset direct from this menu or you can link it to an existing asset. We do also support quantities here. So if you have a number of assets, for example, 100 chairs, then you can just put in this one record that you've got 100 of those, and then you can do partial sales or partial write-offs down there. So the quantities is connected to doing partial sales and partial write-offs. If you do use that functionality, we will do the calculation of the profit or loss on the disposal, and then we'll prorate that amount for the journal posted in, and then we'll just keep a track of the balance going forward. Leases are the subject of a separate detailed video, so I will not cover leases in this video. If you are interested in how AssetAccountant manages leases, please see our website for some more information and a detailed video on how to do asset finance arrangements as well as right of use assets. These two menu items here are used primarily for two purposes. One is work in progress or assets under construction, and the second is if you want to capitalize maintenance costs. For the work in progress option, what you would normally do is have an asset group for assets under construction, work in progress, and then you would build up the cost of the asset. And you can use additional cost if you're paying for an asset in installments. Then when the asset is ready to be put into its useful life, you can then transfer it to the correct group and give it a first use so it will start depreciating. As I mentioned, all of this is available in bulk, and I will show you that functionality shortly. The final menu items here are for selling or writing off assets. So if you do decide you have sold an asset, then you can just enter the date you sold it in the proceeds. AssetAccountant will do the calculation of the profit or loss on disposal and then post all the necessary line items as part of the next journal. So those are the actions you can take to an asset at the asset level. There are some things you can do either specifically for book purposes or for tax purposes. So in the accounts actions here, if you wanted to take some actions on the asset for its book numbers, you can reassess. So if you wanted to change the method or the life or the scrap value, that's possible to do from this reassessment option. You can impair assets, so we support the impairment of assets. This adjustment item is used when you need to make a change to an asset. So we have found that there are often cases where users like to make changes to the cost or the accumulated depreciation value of assets for various reasons. So that just gives you the flexibility to do that. And then finally, we enable make good provisions. So these are for leasehold improvements or for right of use assets where you need to make good provision. And there is a similar menu for tax for items that you can do specifically just for tax purposes. So now we've had a look at the individual asset screen. The next thing I'll move to is reporting that's available through AssetAccountant. We have a menu item down on the left-hand side of this toolbar on the left called Reports. So I'll click into Reports. And you can see here there's a number of standard reports that are available for the depreciation information. So you can see there are things like acquisition reports, disposal reports. It's possible to do forecasts out over a range from 1 year by month or over a 100-year period if you're forecasting out that long. And then there's various other reports that are available as needed. The asset summary, the asset group summary will give you the disclosure information that you need. I'll just run an asset summary so you can see how that works. Once you choose one of these reports, you can choose whether you want that for tax or for book purposes, and then you choose the date range within there. The reports are available in PDF or CSV. The PDFs tend to look nicer and have headers and totals in them, and I'll show you a PDF report here. So you can see here, this is the structure of a PDF report with the asset group information also contained and subtotals and totals within there. So that tends to look a bit nicer for presentation purposes. You can also put your logo on there. All of these reports are also available in CSV format, which is more of a flat file that's ready to be used in a spreadsheet if you wanted to do some additional work or analysis on the data coming out of AssetAccountant. There is also the possibility of running consolidated reports, which you can do from here just by choosing the entities you want to run the relevant report for, and that will consolidate the data within that report for you. There is another way to get information out of AssetAccountant. So in the Assets tab up here, you can look at a list of the assets not in the asset group structure. And there are various things you can do within this screen. If you want to search for an asset by name, you can search for it by name, you can look up the code or so on, or you can filter these assets. So if you wanted to say, show me all of my assets in a certain location, that's possible with there. And then you can also say, filter it down even further. So show me all of my motor vehicles I've got in LA, and that will just keep filtering them down like that. You can then also choose the columns you want to look at. So if you wanted to create a report that was not one of the standard reports, either if you wanted more or less information in there, you can do that from there. And then once you've done that, then you can export this information from the export button here. So you can either export just the columns you've displayed, you can export all the columns, and then there's also these templates here. So I was talking about bulk actions earlier on. So if you bulk disposed of a number of assets, we can just have a look at the bulk disposal template as by way of example. So that will bring up this bulk disposal template. So if you had disposed of a number of these assets, then you can just download this template. You put in the date of disposal for each one of those and the proceeds, and then you can save that to your desktop. And then over in the bulk actions here, you would be able to upload the disposal template here, and then that would just take you through a wizard that would then process the disposals without you having to deal with those one at a time. There's full details of how to do this and some additional videos on this on our website if you would like to follow that through at a more detailed level. Next, I'm going to look at journals. So in AssetAccountant, What you can do with the journals is create them from this screen. There is a control that you can't create a journal earlier than the last journal. And so at this point here, the only journal I can create is, or the earliest journal I can create is again for November the 30th. That will just show any movement since the last journal I created, which means if you create a journal and then you correct the data, then you can just create a new journal and it will only show the effect of the change that you've made. So if I just create a new journal to the end of November, what you'll see when that journal is ready to look at is that you can see in here the only change I've made since that last journal was to create that new asset in here from Intacct, where I brought over the laptop from the Sage Intacct and then had the location set and so on. And then once you're ready in there, then you can just post that journal direct to Intacct from within AssetAccountant. So now you can see that journal's been posted and I'm ready to create my December journal with the full movements from there. Finally, I'm just going to look at register settings. So within register settings, there are various things you can do with the register. So here you can see you can choose currency and so on. There are some settings here to do with depreciation. So if you want to calculate monthly rather than daily, that's possible. And you can have AssetAccountant auto number assets and so on from there. We do support non-standard periods. So if you need 445 or 13 by 4 periods, those are available within there. There's the ability to create your own methods for doing the depreciation calculations. And then here is where you can invite users. So we have 3 levels of user within AssetAccountant. The register manager that can do everything that I've shown you. A user is restricted to managing only the data for that asset in that particular asset register. They can't change the settings and they can't invite other users. And then if you need to, you can also invite guests who only have read-only access to the system. Classifications here is where you can set up the dimensions. And you can see we synchronize those with Sage. So what you can do here is when you set the integration up, you can just ask to synchronize with the dimensions. So you just choose which dimensions you want to create for asset purposes, and then AssetAccountant will create those and just manage those options for you. You can also add additional classifications if you want to track information to do with assets that is not relevant for journals or for Intacct. And then finally, the integration is where you set up the integration details when you're first connecting AssetAccountant with Sage Intacct. So this video has looked at how AssetAccountant works with Sage Intacct. We demonstrated setting up a draft asset in Intacct, pulling that across into AssetAccountant, setting the depreciation treatment for book purposes as well as for tax purposes using the IRS mandated methods. Then we looked at how you run reports and used templates for managing assets in bulk. And then finally, we looked at journals into Intacct and the register settings. Thank you for watching this video. If you require more detailed instruction or information in relation to any aspect of the system, further information is available on our website, www.asset.accountant.